Look at the smartphone in your hand right now. Or, sitting on your desk. We treat that little glass rectangle as, like, the absolute pinnacle of modern human achievement.
Oh, absolutely. We act like it's the ultimate tool.
Right. It connects us to all of human knowledge. It runs our schedules. It distracts us. But what if that incredible device isn't actually our crowning achievement?
Right. What if it's the opposite?
Exactly. What if it's the exact thing blinding us to our own civilizational decline? Welcome to the deep dive. I'm thrilled you're with us today because we are unpacking a text that fundamentally shatters how we view technology, global power, and, well, ourselves.
It really is a paradigm-shifting read. We're looking at 22 deeply provocative excerpts from the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Technological Republic: Hard Power, Self-Belief, and the Future of the West by Alexander C. Karp and Nicholas W. Zimiska.
Yeah, and this isn't, it's not your typical tech industry memoir or some dry policy paper, right?
No, not at all. It reads like a sweeping, aggressive manifesto. I mean, they cover everything from the moral bankruptcy of consumer tech to the shifting tectonic plates of geopolitics, all the way down to the psychological crisis paralyzing our public life.
It's a massive intellectual journey, and just to be clear right up front, Karp and Zimiska are actively swinging at sacred cows across the entire political spectrum.
Oh, yeah. Nobody is safe.
Right, left, right, center, nobody is safe in these 22 excerpts.
Yeah.
Because the material is so highly politically charged, we need to set our usual ground rules for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is crucial. Our job today isn't to validate, endorse, or condemn these deeply debated arguments or cultural critiques. We are strictly here to impartially unpack the architecture of their logic.
Exactly. We just want to give you a comprehensive, objective overview of the debate currently raging at the absolute highest levels of tech and government. We aren't taking sides here.
Right. We're just looking at the blueprint of their argument. And that blueprint starts with a direct assault on what the authors call the tyranny of the apps.
The tyranny of the apps. I love that phrase.
It's vivid, right? They're pointing out that the brightest minds of a generation like the absolute peak of global engineering talent have spent the last 2 decades trapped in a cycle of optimizing consumer convenience.
Wow, yeah.
We have the most capable minds on the planet figuring out how to keep a user scrolling for 5 more seconds rather than, pushing the boundaries of human capability or securing national defense.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because they aim this critique directly at the heart of Silicon Valley. They argue that Silicon Valley owes a massive, unacknowledged moral debt to the country that enabled its rise in the first place.
They really do.
For years, the tech industry has coasted on giving us free email, frictionless food delivery, and soaring rhetoric about connecting the world.
Right.
But Karp and Zimiska are saying the bill has come due.
Yeah, the engineering elite have an affirmative obligation to participate in the defense of the nation.
Right. The decadence of a tech culture will only be forgiven if it actually delivers real, tangible security and economic growth for the public.
That concept of decadence is vital to their thesis. They're essentially diagnosing a ruling class failure. A technological elite that produces endless digital toys while actively ignoring the physical and strategic security of its citizens is, fundamentally broken.
Right, because they benefited from the rule of law, the baseline infrastructure, and the stability of the West, but they've just sort of opted out of defending it.
Exactly. They took the benefits and skipped the responsibilities.
Think of it like this. Imagine the ancient Roman Empire at the absolute zenith of its power. You gather the most brilliant engineering minds on the planet in one place.
Okay, I like where this is going.
But instead of deploying that genius to fortify the borders, advance metallurgy, or build enduring infrastructure, you have them tweaking the underfloor heating in the local bathhouses just to make it a fraction of a degree warmer for the elite.
Meanwhile, the barbarians are literally massing at the gates.
Exactly. The critique here is that our apps are just fancy bathhouses. We are optimizing for supreme, frictionless luxury while completely ignoring the mechanics of survival.
What's fascinating here is that transition from luxury to survival brings us to the geopolitical reality of the 21st century. The authors argue that the era of relying on soft power is dead.
Dead. Completely over.
Yeah. For decades, the West operated on the assumption that we could maintain global order just through the moral appeal of our culture, the reach of our movies, or the, soaring rhetoric of our diplomacy.
Right, but you cannot stop a hypersonic missile with a Hollywood blockbuster.
No, you really can't. Soft power requires a baseline of shared reality, and adversaries no longer share our reality. Therefore, the ability of free societies to actually survive requires a muscular return to hard power.
And the core thesis of this book is that hard power in this century will be built almost entirely on software.
Right. And when they say software, they're pointing directly at artificial intelligence, specifically integrated into the military domain. Karp and Zamiska strip away the illusion
Yeah,
here.
we aren't deciding whether AI weapons get built. That ship has already sailed.
The text states, it without flinching. Our adversaries view the theatrical debates in the West about AI ethics as a strategic vulnerability they can actively exploit.
Wait, really? A vulnerability?
Yeah. They are not pausing their development to indulge in university seminars about the morality of autonomous systems. They're just building them. Therefore, the authors argue, the West has an absolute non-negotiable obligation to build them first and build them better.
They apply a very stark traditional military logic to this entirely new technology. I mean, they point out that if a U.S. Marine is deployed into a hostile environment and asks for a better rifle or a stronger armored vehicle to defend themselves, we build it.
Right. We don't agonize over the philosophical implications of the armor. We equip the soldier.
Exactly. They argue the exact same logic must apply to military software. Software is the new armor. We can debate whether a war is just in the halls of Congress, but once we ask young men and women to step into harm's way, we must be unflinching in giving them the most advanced AI available.
Which leads to perhaps the most monumental historical shift claimed in these excerpts. They declare that the atomic age is ending.
The atomic age. The era of deterrence we've relied on since 1945.
Yes. The physical threat of mutual nuclear annihilation kept superpowers from engaging in direct conflict for nearly 80 years. But they argue a brand new era of deterrence is taking over, and it's built entirely on AI.
Okay, let's break down how that actually works for the listener. Think of traditional nuclear deterrence, like two people standing in a small room, each holding a live grenade.
A very tense room.
Right. Nobody pulls the pin because everyone dies. It's a standoff built on guaranteed physical destruction. But AI deterrence is fundamentally different. It's more like playing high-speed chess in the dark.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
If the enemy knows your autonomous systems can calculate a million strategic moves ahead, identify their launch sites, intercept their communications, and neutralize their command structure at machine speed before they even register a threat on their monitors, they don't even bother sitting down at the chessboard.
You prevent the war by being technologically unassailable.
Exactly.
That is the exact mechanism. If your software can outthink and outpredict the enemy, the deterrent effect is achieved without a single physical shot being fired.
But building this massive, invisible AI military shield begs a deeper question, right? What exactly is the culture we are defending behind that shield? Because if we are neutering our allies and second-guessing our own values, Karp and Zamiska argue that the shield is ultimately useless.
Yeah, this is where they zoom out to the broader global map. They point to the immense, undeniable value of the Pax Americana. American power, for all of its domestic flaws, has secured an extraordinarily long peace.
We're talking about nearly a century where great powers haven't engaged in direct, all-out military conflict.
Right, billions of people have never known a world war. But to maintain this balance moving forward, the authors make a highly controversial claim regarding our core allies, specifically Germany and Japan.
Yeah, they argue the post-World War II arrangements basically need to be ripped up.
They do. They argue that the total defanging of Germany was a post-war necessity that morphed into a permanent, crippling overcorrection. Europe is now paying an incredibly heavy price for it because they fundamentally lack the regional hard power to deter aggression on their own soil.
They have essentially outsourced their security.
Precisely. Similarly, the text argues that maintaining a purely theatrical commitment to Japanese pacifism leaves a massive power vacuum in Asia. The authors are advocating for a heavily rearmed, technologically aggressive alliance, where our partners actually carry the burden of hard power.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not just about defending physical borders or global alliances. It's about an unapologetic defense of Western culture itself.
Yes.
The authors emphasize that the United States, despite a, very complex and imperfect history, has advanced progressive values and human rights more than any other nation.
They specifically highlight the engine of upward mobility. This is one of the few places on the planet where staggering opportunity exists for people who are not born into hereditary elite families. They want to fiercely protect that meritocracy.
And to protect it, they launch into a series of sharp critiques against modern cultural dogma. They believe the West has become dangerously timid about its own foundations.
For instance, they call out what they perceive as a pervasive elite intolerance of religious belief.
Right. They view this intolerance not as enlightenment, but as a sign that the elite political project is incredibly rigid and far less intellectually open than it claims to be.
They also take a sledgehammer to the modern academic dogma that all cultures are equal.
Yeah, they argue that if you operate under the absolute, unquestionable rule that no culture can be criticized, you gloss over historical reality.
You end up pretending that a culture producing immense technological wonder and human rights advancements is functionally equivalent to one that is regressive, dysfunctional, or oppressive.
Right, and that forced equivalence destroys the ability to make value judgments, which a society needs to survive. They tie this into a warning against what they call a vacant and hollow pluralism.
Yeah. For decades, there has been a resistance to defining a core national culture in the name of total inclusivity. But Karp and Zamiska ask a piercing question. Inclusion into what?
Right. If there is no core culture, what are we inviting people to join? Okay, I have to test their logic here on behalf of the listener.
Let's hear it.
If we define this highly rigid, sharp-edged national culture to avoid hollow pluralism, don't we risk alienating the exact, diverse global talent that Silicon Valley relies on?
That's a valid point.
I mean, we just established in the first segment that we desperately need the brightest minds from all over the world to build this complex AI hard power. Doesn't an unapologetic, sharply defined Western culture push away brilliant engineers who don't fit that specific mold?
It's a fantastic paradox, and the authors tackle it head-on. Their answer is that the solution isn't to water down the culture to appease everyone. Instead, you define a culture of building an absolute merit so strongly that it acts as a massive magnet.
Ah, a magnet.
Yeah, a true meritocracy doesn't care where you were born. It cares what you can build. They argue that ambitious, brilliant people are actually attracted to strength, clarity, and the opportunity to achieve grand things.
So by apologizing for Western values and embracing a hollow pluralism, we actually weaken the very beacon that attracts that global talent in the first place.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? A culture of excellence is inherently magnetic, which leads perfectly into the final major pillar of their manifesto. To sustain that kind of unapologetic culture and to wield this unprecedented AI deterrence, a society requires exceptionally strong, visionary leadership.
It does. But when we look at the arena where those leaders are supposed to emerge, our public sphere Karp and Zamiska argue the system is currently designed to destroy exactly those kinds of people.
The diagnosis of our public life is incredibly grim in this book.
They argue that we are currently being led by a roster of ineffectual, empty vessels. And they place the blame not just on the politicians, but on the environment we, the public, have created.
The ruthless, perpetual exposure and destruction of the private lives of public figures actively drives actual talent away from government service.
Add to that the fact that public servants are compensated abysmally compared to the private sector. The authors note that any private business run with the federal government's compensation model and hostile work environment would collapse overnight.
It's like we've engineered the modern political arena to function like a toxic reality TV show, but the only prize for winning is your own psychological destruction.
That's a spot-on analogy. The mechanism here is what they call corrosive caution.
Corrosive caution. Let's dig into that.
If the only way to survive the relentless media vetting process is to scrub your soul of any complex, contradictory, or deeply held beliefs, you end up with leaders who are terrified to make a move.
Right. If a leader is too scared to say the wrong word on a debate stage, how on earth are they going to manage the high-stakes, split-second era of AI deterrence?
They simply can't. They become managers of decline rather than builders of the future. Furthermore, the authors warn against what they term the psychologization of modern politics.
Let's break that down. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means that citizens have increasingly started looking to the political arena to nourish their own souls. Because traditional community or spiritual structures have faded, we rely too heavily on our internal emotional lives, finding expression in politicians we will never actually meet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when you treat a public servant like a priest or a spiritual savior, you are setting yourself up for bitter disappointment, and you fundamentally warp the practical function of government.
So the public sphere is a toxic meat grinder. Our leaders are paralyzed by corrosive caution, and citizens are looking for spiritual salvation in tact policy debates.
It's a profound mess.
It really is. So this raises an important question. How do Karp and Zamiska propose we actually fix this so we can get back to building the future?
They offer a series of demanding solutions. First, on a basic human level, they plead for society to show far more grace and forgiveness to those who subject themselves to public life.
That sounds reasonable.
We have to stop being gleeful at the demise of our political enemies. The vanquishing of an opponent should be a moment to pause and reflect, not to rejoice. If we completely eradicate the space for the natural complexities, flaws, and contradictions of a human psyche in our leaders, we will end up governed by sociopaths or empty suits.
We have to stop punishing people for being human if we want human leaders. What about the tech side? How does Silicon Valley fix its part of the equation?
The authors argue we need to culturally applaud the builders, the people who step in with capital and vision where the market or the government has failed. They specifically point to the cultural treatment of Elon Musk here.
Right, the grand narratives.
Yes. They note how modern culture almost snickers at his interest in grand narratives, like civilizational survival or going to Mars. He's often treated with this thinly veiled scorn, as if billionaires should just quietly optimize supply chains and stay in their lane.
The argument here is that this cultural cynicism toward genuine builders is toxic. A civilization actually needs people obsessed with grand narratives to pull it forward.
Exactly. It's about respecting the ambition to build, rather than the ambition to critique. But they also demand that Silicon Valley step up locally, right? They can't just focus on Mars.
Oh, yeah. They argue that tech leaders must take serious financial risks to address violent crime right in their own backyards. When local politicians have essentially shrugged and abandoned any serious efforts to save lives or maintain order, tech leaders cannot just float in the cloud.
The stark disconnect between mapping the human genome and not being able to walk down a street in San Francisco safely is a fatal civilizational flaw.
But the authors go even further than local crime. They suggest something massive regarding how every single citizen participates in the survival of the Republic.
This might be their most sweeping policy proposal. The text argues that society should seriously consider moving away from an all-volunteer military force. They propose a return to universal national service.
Wow, an actual draft.
Yeah, but the underlying logic is profound. We should only fight the next war if absolutely everyone shares in the risk and the cost.
If the burden of a conflict falls on every single family, regardless of wealth, class, or geography, society becomes hyper-invested in making sure we only fight when it is absolutely necessary.
Right. It's the ultimate counter to that hollow pluralism, a shared, undeniable national duty.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. Let me just quickly recap this journey for you. The authors of the Technological Republic are loudly demanding an end to tech decadence. No more optimizing bathhouses while the world burns. They are calling for a muscular return to hard power through military AI, arguing that deterrence has permanently evolved. They are advocating for an unapologetic, magnetic defense of Western cultural values and meritocracy. And finally, they are pleading for a total overhaul of our public sphere, a culture that rewards genuine builders, forgives human flaws in leadership, and demands shared sacrifice over petty destruction.
It is a profound, demanding, and highly controversial vision for the future of the West. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mold something that bridges their point on AI deterrence and their call for universal national service.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider this. If the atomic age is truly over, and invisible machine-speed AI deterrence is the new reality of hard power, what does universal national service actually look like for you or your kids in 20 years?
That's a good question.
If the ultimate weapon is software, maybe the next draft won't send you to a physical trench. Maybe you'll direct your brain, your personal data, or your private computing power to train the nation's defense models. Are we ready for a world where shared risk isn't just about physical harm on a battlefield, but a profound, involuntary digital sacrifice?
That is a chilling and fascinating question to sit with. Are we ready to give up our private digital lives to power the ultimate defense shield? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. The next time you look down at that smartphone in your hand, I hope you see it a little differently, not just as an optimized tyrant of your attention, but maybe as the very front line of a totally new global reality. Keep questioning, keep digging, and we will catch you next time.